Hey guys, thank you for tuning to Slappy's Garage. On this episode, I'm continuing the build series where I'm trying to help people who are starting to get into building motorcycles, or they want to work on their first bike, or they're tired of the bike they have and they want to make it better. So on this episode, I'm talking about performance versus aesthetic. Now, if you go back to my first video of finding your style, it's very important to find your style before going into this category. So performance versus aesthetic, there's times they combine, there's times they're alone, and there's times that you should try to think what's best for you. So now I have here a Venn diagram showing some main portions of each. There's many more that combine into each other. There's ways they can go in each way, but for the most part, I think this is a very accurate representation of performance versus aesthetic and where they meet in the middle. So talk about your style. Maybe you don't have enough out of your bike and you really want to perform better. You don't care how it looks. You just want the most performance-based bike there is. You just want it to perform well and you don't care how it looks. So that can be your motor work, if you want to put a bigger motor into the bike, but that's not all you need to do to have a fast bike, because you need to have better suspension and brakes that actually put that performance down to where it is effective. Now, along with that, you need to be comfortable on the bike and other things. So we'll get more into that in a little bit, but then you can do other things such as a clutch upgrade, motor mounts and stabilizers, air cleaner, charging system, oil cooler, ignition and tune, and motor work. They go together because you don't want to have a stock ignition or a stock carburetor or stock tune on a fuel injected bike or motor work, because it's not going to perform well. Maybe your intake's not going to keep up, or you need to do an exhaust to actually get the effectiveness out of that. It's a very costly process to go into the motor. Personally, for me, I've always had fun on stock motors and beating them up and just riding them hard and upgrading everything around that. And then eventually, once everything's upgraded, going into that aspect of motor work and more power. Now, let's say you just think your bike looks boring, you want to stand out a little bit, or you want to build a chopper, have a different style bike. That is your aesthetic, your paint and powder coat, your wheels, lighting, chrome and polish, fairing, sissy bars, bags, whatever you might add in your seat. Your seat is a very big thing too. It's your comfortability. Everything I underlined in green, I think is very important for comfortability on the bike. And might be one thing you want to start with. Those are the things I find important, is being comfortable before it looks good and having it perform well before I have to put power down. Now, everyone's different. Once you figure out your style, you can figure out what's the right move for you next. So let's get started, and what's in between. These are very important aspects that affect both, which would be your controls. The way you sit in the bike, the way you position yourself, it can help you perform better by being comfortable and being able to dive into turns a little bit more. Or maybe you're just not comfortable riding a stock handlebars like this. You want something up here. Or maybe you want the aesthetic of ape hangers or whatever it may be. Everyone's different, but that meets right in between because the controls affect how you can ride the bike. That's why I have it linked with performance. Your suspension. This is a very big performance upgrade, but it's also an aesthetic because maybe you want fender gap in the rear tire. That fender gap also will allow you to dive a little bit more on turns before you're scraping your foot pegs. And I think that's one of the most important upgrades on a bike is suspension. Suspension is one of the first things I do every time I get a motorcycle, and try to upgrade it a little bit from stock because the stock suspensions are not best on Harley. Exhaust is not really your comfortability. That's just an aesthetic upgrade sometimes, or it could be a performance upgrade because you're just limiting your motor. Your motor is very restricted with those stock exhaust sometimes. So you want to have that little bit of performance. You're not going to gain crazy numbers off an exhaust itself. It's going to help the bike a little bit, but once you pair it with motor work, that's when you get a lot out of a proper exhaust setup. And brakes. Now, you might wonder why I think brakes are aesthetic. Brakes, the look of the brakes, if you want to have a performance style bike, but you're not really going into the motor, you're not doing anything crazy, the brakes are there for you to stop. It's your comfortability, being able to stop on a moment's notice. Is the look of it. You can want radial calipers, you think they look awesome, or maybe you want to run a drum brake on a chopper because you want to have that whole side of the wheel empty because you think that looks awesome, which I agree, but it's not the best performing thing, so it's all perspective of your own. Now, going into the green underlines, these are where I like starting for my builds. If I'm building a Dyna, a Sportster, whatever it may be, those green underlines are the first things I want to focus on unless I'm doing a frame up build. So we'll start with the performance, which are the motor mounts and stabilizers, maybe a steering stabilizer, but like the twin cam Dynas, the motor mounts and having a stabilizer in there will help the bike track much better, especially at highway speeds where there's dyno wobble. It's real, it's scary, it's not fun when it happens. So you want to limit the risk or limit the times it will happen with motor mount stabilizers. Like I said, the controls, the way you sit, that's your comfortability. That matches with your seating. Your seat can change the position of your body a little bit by inch forward, inch back, depending on what seat you get, or maybe it's just more comfortable to sit down on for long rides. Going into the aesthetic side of your comfortability, lighting. This is very important because some of the lights that you have on these bikes, you can't see anything at night, and you can't see animals crossing the road if you live in a rural area, even suburban area. You don't want to go ahead and run into a deer because those deers will do damage. Another thing is your fairing and sissy bar. The fairing will help keep the wind off you. A sissy bar is great if you do a lot of two-up riding, or if you want to go state by state and have a bag on the bike and strap it to your bike. It's very nice to have. It's very convenient having a sissy bar, and it's very convenient having a fairing, especially in the colder weather. Storage bags. Storage bags are awesome to have. I've ridden without them, I've ridden with them, but being able in the fall time or the springtime to throw a hoodie in, so when nighttime comes, it gets a little chilly out, you don't have to worry about, oh, I need to get home. I can just grab something out of my bag, and here we go. We're ready to go. We're ready to go keep riding for the night. Now, where they match in between. Like we already talked about controls. The controls is your positioning, the suspension. The suspension is such a comfortable aspect because those stock Harley front ends, they're very washed out, especially when they're old and beat up. If you just want to rebuild it, put a little taller, stronger spring, it really does help the ride quality of the bike. And your brakes. Proper braking is something I've always focused on, like my iron head here that has a floating caliper rotor matched with the Dokiko front and rear. It's an oversized front rotor. This thing stops amazing. Or my FXR and the Dyna, I did dual disc upgrades. And even my chopper one day, I do want to do a cool little setup for the brakes. Yeah, I know, front brakes on a chopper, you're not a real man. Yeah, but I don't care. That's what I like. It's all about what you like. So when you find that balance of your style, if you didn't watch that video, go back to that video. Figure out what your style is, do your research, figure out what's the best route to go, and then now performance versus aesthetic, figure out where you're gonna focus your money first. So this is just a little touch base of trying to help you guys with the right path of helping you do the motorcycle you wanna build for yourself. Catch me on the last video. I'm gonna try to put all this together and help you with your timeline and try to figure out what the best route is for you to build your motorcycle. So thank you guys for watching Slabby's Garage. Check out those earlier videos if you haven't already. I'm just here to help, and I hope you guys get your bike finished soon.